Welcome to another peaceful journey through the mists of time, dear friend. Before we begin tonight's exploration into the remarkable world of Viking raiding tactics and how these northern warriors reshape the face of medieval Europe, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you find understanding and comfort in these historical bedtime stories, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps more people discover these gentle adventures through time. And it lets me know you're enjoying our nighttime wanderings through the corridors of human history. Now, settle in comfortably as we drift back through the centuries to witness the ingenious strategies and tactics that made the Norse the most feared and respected warriors of their age. Close your eyes and let yourself journey to the wind-swept fjords of Scandinavia, where dragon-proud longships prepared for voyages that would forever change the course of European history. Tonight, I invite you to witness the masterful art of Viking warfare, not merely random brutality, but sophisticated military strategies that combine speed, psychology, and tactical brilliance to overcome seemingly impossible odds. From the first shocking raid on Lindisfarne to the establishment of vast trading networks spanning from Greenland to Constantinople, these tactics showcase how the Norse transformed from isolated Scandinavian raiders into the dominant force that shaped medieval Europe for centuries to come. The foundation of Viking success, the Longship Revolution. Our journey begins with the most crucial element of Viking success, their revolutionary maritime technology. Picture, if you will, the misty shores of 9th century Scandinavia, where master shipwrights labored over vessels that would become the instruments of European transformation. The Viking longship was far more than a simple boat. It was a masterpiece of engineering that combined speed, maneuverability, and tactical flexibility in ways that no other vessel of its time could match. These sleek, serpentine craft measured between 65 and 100 feet in length, with shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate waters as shallow as 3 feet deep. This revolutionary design meant that Viking warriors could strike where no enemy expected them, sailing up rivers that conventional ships could never navigate, appearing suddenly at the heart of supposedly protected territories. The construction of these vessels revealed the Norse mastery of maritime technology. Built using the clinker method, overlapping wooden planks were riveted together with iron bolts spaced precisely 2 feet apart. This spacing was crucial. Too close, and the hull would become rigid and brittle. Too far apart, and it would lack structural integrity. The Vikings understood intuitively that flexibility was survival, creating vessels that could bend with the waves rather than break against them. The shallow draft that made these ships so tactically superior came with its own challenges. Unlike the deep-keeled vessels of other European powers, longships had virtually no lateral resistance below the waterline. This meant they could be driven sideways by strong winds, making them extremely difficult to handle in rough conditions. But this apparent weakness was also their greatest strength. It allowed them to beach anywhere, launch surprise attacks from unexpected directions, and escape before enemy forces could respond. The symmetrical design of Viking longships was another tactical innovation that provided enormous advantages. With identical bow and stern construction, these vessels could reverse direction instantly without turning around. When retreating from a raid, Vikings could simply shift their oars to the opposite side of the ship and row backward, maintaining their fighting formation while escaping danger. This capability proved crucial in countless engagements, where the ability to disengage rapidly meant the difference between successful raid and catastrophic defeat. Each longship carried between 30 and 60 warriors, depending on its size, with the famous Gokstad ship accommodating 34 men at 16 oar stations per side. The warriors used their own sea chests as rowing benches, creating a vessel that was simultaneously warship, transport, and mobile fortress. When the rectangular woolen sail caught favorable winds, these ships could achieve speeds of up to 15 knots, faster than any pursuing vessel of their era. The psychology of terror, creating the Viking reputation. The second pillar of Viking tactical success lay in their masterful understanding of psychological warfare. The Norse warriors understood something that would not be formally recognized by military theorists for centuries, that the battle for the mind was often more important than the battle for the field. The very appearance of a Viking fleet on the horizon was calculated to inspire terror. The dragon heads and serpent necks that adorned the prows of their ships were not mere decoration, but psychological weapons designed to demoralize enemies before the first blow was struck. Contemporary accounts describe how these carved figureheads seemed to breathe fire and life as they cut through the waves, creating an impression of supernatural menace that preceded the warriors themselves. The Vikings amplified this psychological impact through careful timing and presentation. They would appear at dawn, their ships emerging from the morning mist like creatures from nightmare, their oars moving in perfect synchronization to create an almost hypnotic rhythm. The sight of 30 or 40 longships approaching in formation, their crews chanting war songs and beating their shields in unison, created a spectacle that few medieval minds could process without terror. Sound played a crucial role in Viking psychological warfare. The Norse understood that the human ear was as important a target as the human eye. They would blow war horns that echoed across the water, creating an otherworldly wailing that seemed to come from every direction at once. The rhythmic pounding of oars against the sides of ships, combined with the crew's battle chants, created a sonic assault that preceded the physical attack by crucial minutes. The reputation of Viking ferocity was carefully cultivated and ruthlessly maintained. Every raid was designed not just to gather plunder, but to create stories that would travel faster than the Vikings themselves. They would deliberately leave survivors who could spread tales of their prowess, creating a network of fear that preceded them to their next target. Monasteries that surrendered without resistance might be spared the worst violence, while those that fought would be made examples of, ensuring that future targets would remember the consequences of resistance. The Vikings also understood the power of religious and cultural symbolism in warfare. Their attacks on Christian monasteries were not random acts of greed, but calculated assaults on the spiritual heart of their enemies. By demonstrating that they could desecrate the most sacred sites with impunity, they shattered the confidence of entire populations in their ability to resist Norse power. The art of the raid: speed, surprise, and tactical flexibility. The third element of Viking success was their perfection of hit-and-run tactics that maximized their advantages while minimizing their vulnerabilities. These were not the chaotic attacks of desperate barbarians, but carefully planned operations that combined intelligence gathering, tactical coordination, and logistical mastery. Viking raids typically began long before the ships appeared on the horizon. Norse traders, who were often the same men who would later return as raiders, gathered crucial intelligence about their targets during peaceful visits. They would note the layout of monasteries, the strength of local defenses, the patterns of daily life, and the location of the most valuable treasures. This intelligence network meant that when the longships finally arrived, their crews knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The timing of Viking raids was equally calculated. They preferred to attack at dawn, when their targets were least prepared, and the psychological impact of their appearance would be greatest. The early morning light would backlight their ships as they approached from the east, making them appear larger and more numerous than they actually were. The mist that often clung to rivers and coastlines in the early hours provided natural camouflage until the last possible moment. The actual assault followed a pattern that had been refined through countless successful operations. The longships would beach directly on the shore, their shallow drafts allowing them to drive right up onto the sand or shingle. The moment the ships touched land, warriors would pour over the sides, their boots hitting the beach while the vessels were still sliding forward on their momentum. This technique, which required perfect timing and coordination, meant that Vikings could go from sailing to fighting in a matter of seconds. The raiders would immediately form into their preferred battle formations, typically beginning with a shower of arrows and javelins to suppress any immediate resistance. Viking longbows, some measuring over 6 feet in length, had a range of several hundred meters, and could devastate unprepared defenders before they could organize a response. This missile barrage served both practical and psychological purposes, killing or wounding defenders, while demonstrating the Vikings' overwhelming firepower. Once the initial missile attack had cleared the immediate landing zone, Viking warriors would advance in their famous shield wall formation. This tactic involved warriors standing shoulder to shoulder, their round shields overlapping, to create an impenetrable barrier of wood, leather, and iron. The shield wall served both offensive and defensive purposes. It protected the advancing Vikings from enemy missiles, while presenting a unified front that could smash through any hastily organized resistance. The Vikings' mastery of terrain was another crucial element of their tactical success. Unlike the rigid formations favored by many contemporary armies, Norse warriors adapted their tactics to the specific conditions of each raid. In open ground, they might deploy their fearsome wedge formations, the boar's snout or swine array, designed to penetrate enemy lines like a spear point. In confined spaces like monastery courtyards, they would break into smaller groups that could maneuver independently while maintaining mutual support. The Berserker phenomenon. Elite shock troops. Perhaps no aspect of Viking warfare has captured the imagination quite like the Berserkers. Elite warriors who fought in a trance-like state of fury that made them seemingly invulnerable to pain and fear. These men represented the ultimate expression of Viking psychological warfare, serving as both supernatural terror weapons and devastatingly effective combat troops. The Berserkers derived their name from the Old Norse berserker, meaning bare shirt, referring to the animal pelts they wore in battle. Some sources suggest they went into battle naked, except for these animal skins, while others describe them as wearing minimal armor to demonstrate their contempt for personal safety. Regardless of their exact appearance, the psychological impact of berserkers was undeniable. The sight of wild-haired warriors charging into combat while howling like animals was enough to break the morale of even disciplined troops. The berserkers' battle fury, known as Berserker Gangra, was achieved through a combination of ritual preparation, psychological conditioning, and possibly chemical enhancement. Before battle, these warriors would work themselves into increasingly agitated states through chanting, dancing, and ritualistic behavior. They would bite their shields, howl like wolves or bears, and enter what can only be described as a controlled psychotic episode. Contemporary accounts describe berserkers as being immune to fire and iron, feeling no pain from wounds that would incapacitate normal warriors. While this was obviously an exaggeration born of terror and superstition, there is substantial evidence that berserkers could indeed function effectively while suffering injuries that would stop other fighters. Modern understanding of combat psychology suggests that extreme adrenaline states can indeed create temporary anesthesia and superhuman pain tolerance. The tactical deployment of berserkers was as sophisticated as their individual preparation. They were typically placed at the front of Viking formations, where their shock value would be greatest. When the shield wall advanced, berserkers would lead the charge, their terrifying appearance and reckless bravery serving to demoralize enemies while inspiring their own comrades. Their presence often decided battles before they truly began, as opposing forces would break and flee rather than face these seemingly supernatural warriors. However, berserkers were also difficult to control once their fury had been unleashed. Historical accounts describe instances where berserkers continued fighting even after their enemies had fled, sometimes turning on their own allies in their blood-drunk state. This unpredictability meant that Viking commanders had to use them carefully, deploying them for maximum psychological impact while maintaining enough control to prevent them from becoming a liability. The aftermath of berserker fury was as dramatic as the battle state itself. Once their rage had burned out, these warriors would collapse into exhaustion so complete that they were virtually helpless. This vulnerability meant that berserker units required protection during their recovery period, adding another layer of tactical complexity to their employment. The Great Raids, Lindisfarne, and the birth of the Viking Age. The raid on Lindisfarne Monastery on June 8, 793, marked the beginning of the Viking Age and perfectly demonstrated the tactical principles that would guide Norse warfare for the next 3 centuries. This single attack, lasting only a few hours, sent shockwaves across medieval Europe and established the template for hundreds of subsequent raids. Lindisfarne represented an ideal target for Viking tactics. The monastery was located on Holy Island, just off the Northumbrian coast, making it accessible only by boat during high tide. This isolation, which the monks had chosen for spiritual reasons, made the monastery virtually impossible to defend or reinforce once attackers had landed. The Vikings' shallow draft longships could easily navigate the tidal channels that protected the island, while their enemies' deeper vessels could not follow. The wealth concentrated at Lindisfarne made it an irresistible target. As one of the most important religious sites in northern England, The monastery housed illuminated manuscripts, golden altar vessels, jeweled reliquaries, and other treasures that represented years of accumulated wealth. More importantly, the monastery's reputation for sanctity meant that it had never been fortified. The monks relied on divine protection rather than earthly defenses. The Vikings' approach to Lindisfarne demonstrated their understanding of both tactical and strategic warfare. They struck during the early morning hours, when the monks would be gathered for their dawn prayers. This timing served multiple purposes. It concentrated their targets in a single location, caught them at their most vulnerable moment, and provided the symbolic power of corrupting the sacred ritual of morning worship. The psychological impact of the Lindisfarne Raid extended far beyond its immediate military consequences. Alcuin, a Northumbrian scholar serving at Charlemagne's court, wrote that never before has such terror appeared in Britain, and described how the heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar. These accounts, which spread rapidly across Europe, established the Vikings' reputation as supernatural forces of destruction that could strike anywhere without warning. The success of Lindisfarne validated the Viking tactical approach and encouraged similar raids across the British Isles. Within a few years, Norse raiders were appearing off the coasts of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, applying the same principles of speed, surprise, and psychological warfare that had proven so effective in Northumbria. The evolution of Viking strategy. From raiding to conquest. As the 9th century progressed, Viking tactics evolved from simple hit-and-run raids to sophisticated campaigns of conquest and settlement. The arrival of the great Heathen army in England in 865 marked this crucial transition, demonstrating how Norse military thinking had adapted to larger strategic objectives. The great Heathen army represented a fundamental shift in Viking operations. Instead of seasonal raids launched from Scandinavian bases, this was a permanent military force designed to conquer and hold territory. Contemporary sources describe it as one of the largest Viking forces ever assembled, with thousands of warriors transported in hundreds of longships across the North Sea. The army's tactics reflected this new strategic focus. Rather than striking isolated targets and retreating, they established fortified winter camps that served as bases for extended operations. These camps, such as the one at Thetford in East Anglia, were sophisticated fortifications that demonstrated the Vikings' evolution from raiders to conquerors. They included earthwork defenses, protected harbors for their ships, and supply depots that could sustain large forces through entire campaigning seasons. The great Heathen army also demonstrated the Vikings' mastery of coalition warfare. The force was led by 3 sons of the legendary Ragnar Lodbrok, Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ivar the Boneless, and Ubba, who coordinated their individual war bands into a unified command structure. This cooperation between previously independent leaders showed how Viking society was adapting to the demands of large-scale warfare. The army's tactical approach combined traditional Viking strengths with new techniques adapted for territorial conquest. They continued to use their superior mobility to strike unexpected targets, but now these attacks served strategic purposes rather than simply gathering plunder. By capturing key fortified positions and river crossings, they could control entire regions while denying their enemies the ability to concentrate forces against them. The Vikings' treatment of conquered populations also evolved during this period. Instead of simply killing or enslaving everyone they encountered, they began to establish puppet rulers and tributary relationships that allowed them to extract long-term wealth from their conquests. This approach required sophisticated administrative capabilities and demonstrated how Viking society was adapting to the challenges of ruling. Settled populations. Naval tactics, mastering the seas and rivers. Viking naval warfare represented one of the most sophisticated maritime tactical systems of the medieval period, combining technical innovation with strategic vision to dominate European waters for over 2 centuries. Their approach to naval combat was fundamentally different from that of their contemporaries, emphasizing speed, maneuverability, and coordinated fleet actions over the heavy, slow-moving vessels favored by other powers. The basic Viking naval formation was the line ahead, with longships arranged in single file to maximize their ability to maneuver in confined waters. This formation allowed the fleet to navigate narrow rivers and coastal channels that would have been possible for larger vessels, while maintaining the ability to deploy rapidly into battle line when combat was imminent. The lead ship, usually commanded by the fleet's senior leader, would set the pace and direction, while the following vessels maintained precise intervals to avoid collision. When battle was joined, Viking naval tactics emphasized boarding and close combat over missile exchanges. Their ships were designed primarily as troop transports rather than weapons platforms, and their crews were trained to fight as warriors rather than sailors. The typical Viking naval engagement began with the opposing fleets maneuvering for position, often with smaller, faster ships, attempting to flank larger formations while the main battle lines closed for combat. The boarding action was the decisive moment in Viking naval warfare. Ships would come alongside each other and be lashed together with grappling hooks and rope, creating floating battlefields where warriors could engage in hand-to-hand combat. The Vikings' superior training in close quarters, fighting often proved decisive in these melees, as their weapons and tactics were specifically designed for the confined space and uncertain footing of shipboard combat. Viking naval commanders also demonstrated remarkable tactical flexibility in their use of terrain and weather. They would use tides, currents, and winds to gain advantages over less experienced opponents, timing their attacks to coincide with favorable conditions that would hamper enemy maneuvers. The shallow draft of their ships allowed them to retreat into waters too shallow for pursuit, while their superior seamanship enabled them to fight effectively in conditions that would paralyze other fleets. The Battle of Svalbard in the year 1000 provides an excellent example of sophisticated Viking naval tactics in action. King Olaf Tryggvason's fleet found itself outnumbered by a coalition of enemy forces, but rather than fleeing, they implemented a defensive formation that maximized their combat effectiveness. Olaf's ships lashed themselves together stern to stern, creating a floating fortress that could concentrate firepower while protecting their flanks from enemy boarding attempts. Siegewaffe, adapting to urban defenses. As Viking campaigns evolved from raiding to conquest, they were forced to develop tactics for attacking fortified positions, a significant departure from their traditional emphasis on mobility and surprise. The sieges of Paris in 845 and 885. 886 demonstrated how Viking warfare adapted to meet the challenges of medieval urban defenses, while maintaining their core tactical principles. The first siege of Paris in 845 showed the Vikings at their most traditional. A swift raid up the Seine designed to extract tribute rather than capture territory. Ragnar Lodbrok's fleet of 120 ships bypassed the city's defenses entirely, using their superior mobility to threaten the surrounding countryside until King Charles the Bold agreed to pay 7,000 livres of silver to make them leave. This approach reflected classic Viking thinking. Why waste time and men attacking strong fortifications when the same strategic objective could be achieved through intimidation and negotiation? The siege of 886 represented a fundamental shift in Viking siege tactics, demonstrating their ability to adapt traditional methods to new challenges. This time the Vikings came prepared for extended operations, bringing siege engines including catapults, battering rams, and specialized equipment for attacking fortifications. The presence of these weapons showed that Viking military thinking had evolved beyond simple raiding to encompass sophisticated siege warfare. The Vikings' approach to the siege demonstrated their understanding of medieval urban vulnerabilities. Rather than attempting to storm Paris's strong walls directly, they focused on controlling the bridges that connected the city to the mainland. By capturing these key points, they could isolate the defenders and prevent reinforcement while maintaining their own supply lines along the Seine. The psychological warfare that had proven so effective in raiding was also adapted for siege operations. The Vikings would parade their captured enemies before the city walls, demonstrating the fate that awaited those who resisted. They would also stage mock battles and weapon displays designed to demoralize the defenders while showing off their own military capabilities. However, the siege also revealed the limitations of Viking tactical adaptation. Their forces were not equipped for extended siege operations, and their traditional emphasis on mobility became a liability when facing determined defenders behind strong fortifications. The Vikings eventually abandoned the siege, not because they were defeated in battle, but because they lacked the logistical capabilities to sustain such operations indefinitely. The Fortress Network. Defensive innovation. While Vikings are primarily remembered as raiders and attackers, they also demonstrated remarkable innovation in defensive architecture and tactics. The construction of ring fortresses during the reign of Harald Bluetooth in the late 10th century showed how Viking military thinking adapted to the needs of defending territory, rather than simply attacking it. The 5 major ring fortresses, Agersborg, Furkat, Nanabakken, Trelleborgen, represented a revolutionary approach to medieval fortification. Built to identical geometric specifications, despite being separated by hundreds of miles, these fortresses demonstrated a level of central planning and technical expertise that rivaled anything being built elsewhere in Europe at the time. The design of these fortresses reflected Viking tactical principles adapted for defensive purposes. The perfectly circular layout with 4 gates positioned at the cardinal points allowed for rapid deployment of forces in any direction. The internal street network, with roads leading directly from the center to each gate, meant that reinforcements could be moved quickly to threaten sectors without confusion or delay. The ring fortresses also incorporated lessons learned from centuries of Viking raids. The earthen ramparts were designed to absorb the impact of siege engines rather than simply resist them, while the deep, surrounding ditches would channel attacking forces into predetermined killing zones. The relatively low profile of these fortifications made them difficult targets for catapults and other siege weapons, while the geometric precision of their construction eliminated blind spots and defensive weaknesses. The size and placement of these fortresses revealed their strategic purpose. Agersborg, the largest, could accommodate over 3,000 warriors and was positioned to control the key military and trade route between Western Europe and the Baltic. The other fortresses were similarly positioned to dominate important transportation corridors, creating a network of mutually supporting strongholds that could control movement across Harald's kingdom. Expansion and settlement. The strategic vision. Viking expansion represented far more than random writing. It was a coordinated strategic enterprise that established Norse influence from Greenland to Constantinople. The patterns of Viking expansion reveal sophisticated understanding of geography, economics, and political opportunity that transformed them from regional raiders into a truly international power. The westward expansion into the Atlantic demonstrated Viking mastery of oceanic navigation and their ability to establish self-sustaining colonies in hostile environments. The settlement of Iceland in the 9th century created a forward base for further expansion, while the establishment of colonies in Greenland extended Norse influence to the edge of the known world. The brief colonization of North America, though ultimately unsuccessful, showed that Viking ambitions knew no geographic limits. The eastern expansion along the river systems of Russia and Eastern Europe revealed different tactical capabilities. Here, Vikings adapted their maritime expertise to riverine warfare, using their longships to penetrate deep into the continental interior along rivers like the Volga and Dnieper. These expeditions established trade routes that brought Islamic silver and Byzantine gold back to Scandinavia, while Viking mercenaries served in the Byzantine Empire's elite Varangian Guard. The settlement of the British Isles demonstrated Viking ability to adapt their tactics to different political and geographic conditions. In Ireland, they established fortified trading posts that evolved into the country's first true cities, including Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick. In England, they conquered entire kingdoms and established the Danelaw, a vast territory under Norse rule that fundamentally altered the political structure of early medieval Britain. These settlements were not simply military outposts, but sophisticated colonial enterprises that required careful planning and administration. Viking settlers had to establish agricultural systems, trade networks, and governmental structures that could function independently of the Scandinavian homeland. The success of these colonies showed that Viking society possessed not only military prowess, but also the administrative and technical capabilities necessary for long-term territorial control. The legacy of Viking tactics, transforming medieval warfare. The impact of Viking tactical innovations extended far beyond their own military campaigns, fundamentally altering the nature of medieval warfare and forcing their enemies to develop new defensive strategies. The threat of Viking raids led to the construction of countless fortifications across Europe, while their naval innovations influenced shipbuilding techniques for centuries to come. Viking emphasis on mobility and surprise forced their enemies to reconsider traditional military thinking. The heavy cavalry that dominated continental European warfare was largely useless against raiders, who could strike from the sea and retreat before mounted forces could respond. This reality led to the development of new tactical doctrines that emphasized rapid response and coastal defense over the ponderous campaign armies of the Carolingian period. The psychological impact of Viking warfare also had lasting consequences for medieval military culture. The reputation for ferocity that Vikings cultivated so carefully became a template for other warrior societies, while their emphasis on personal honor and battlefield prowess influenced the development of chivalric ideals. The Berserker tradition, though it disappeared with the conversion to Christianity, lived on in the European fascination with warrior cults and military brotherhoods. Viking naval technology profoundly influenced the development of medieval shipbuilding. Their innovations in hull design, particularly the use of clinker construction and shallow drafts, were adopted by shipwrights across northern Europe. The tactical flexibility demonstrated by Viking fleets also influenced naval doctrine, showing how smaller, more maneuverable vessels could defeat larger but less agile opponents through superior seamanship and tactical coordination. Perhaps most importantly, Viking expansion created the first truly international European economy since the fall of the Roman Empire. Their trade networks connected the Atlantic islands with the Black Sea, while their settlements served as economic nodes that facilitated commerce between previously isolated regions. This economic integration laid the foundation for the medieval commercial revolution and the eventual emergence of unified European political systems. The Eternal Thunder. 5 centuries of strategic mastery. As you drift towards sleep tonight, remember the extraordinary tactical legacy of the Viking Age, when Scandinavian warriors developed military innovations that would influence warfare for centuries to come. From the revolutionary design of their longships to the psychological mastery of their raiding tactics, from the fearsome reputation of their berserkers to the sophisticated engineering of their fortresses, the Vikings created a comprehensive system of warfare that dominated medieval Europe for over 3 centuries. Their success was not built on superior numbers or advanced technology, but on tactical innovation, strategic vision, and an understanding of human psychology that was centuries ahead of their time. They showed that small, highly motivated forces could defeat much larger enemies through superior training, better equipment, and more sophisticated tactics. Most importantly, they demonstrated that the ability to adapt and innovate was the key to military success in a rapidly changing world. The Vikings transformed warfare from the static, ritualized conflicts of the early medieval period into a dynamic, strategically focused enterprise that required constant innovation and adaptation. Their emphasis on mobility, surprise, and psychological warfare became fundamental principles of military science that remain relevant today. Their understanding of logistics, intelligence gathering, and coalition building showed levels of strategic sophistication that would not be matched in Europe for centuries. The thunder of Viking longships may have long since faded from European waters, but their tactical innovations continue to echo through military history. Every amphibious assault, every special forces operation, every example of small units achieving strategic objectives through superior tactics and training carries forward the legacy of those Norse warriors who showed that courage, intelligence, and innovation could overcome any obstacle. These lessons extend far beyond military history. The Vikings showed that any group, regardless of their origins or initial resources, could achieve greatness through dedication to excellence, willingness to innovate, and commitment to strategic thinking. Their transformation from isolated Scandinavian farmers into the dominant force in medieval Europe demonstrates the power of adaptive leadership and strategic vision. In our modern age, when technological change happens at unprecedented speed and traditional advantages can be swept away overnight, the Viking example reminds us that the most important weapons in any conflict are intelligence, adaptability, and the courage to embrace change. Their legacy teaches us that victory belongs not to the largest or strongest, but to those who can think most clearly, adapt most quickly, and execute most effectively. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the tactical innovations that shaped medieval Europe and created the legendary reputation of the Viking Age. If you enjoyed this exploration of how the Norse revolutionized warfare through strategic thinking and tactical innovation, please like this video and subscribe for more historical adventures. Sleep well, and may your rest be as peaceful as the waters that once carried Viking longships to the far corners of the known world. Sweet dreams, and remember that the spirit of Viking innovation, the determination to find new solutions to old problems, the courage to venture into uncharted waters, and the wisdom to learn from every success and failure, continues to inspire those who dare to challenge the status quo and create something new from the materials at hand. May their example encourage you to approach your own challenges with the same tactical thinking, strategic vision, and unstoppable determination that made the Vikings the masters of medieval warfare.